we're now going to move to our question time panel. So I'd like to invite the panel to come to the stage, and I'm going to tell you who they are as they kind of come up. Thank you very much. So we have the panel is going to be hosted by none other than Claer Barrett, who is the FT Consumer Editor. And then we have Anthony Rafferty, who is the CEO of Origo. I don't know if you're going to do a dance like Claire. We have Joe Little from Emery Little, Sarah Lyons from Parmenion, James Daly from Fairer Finance, and Sheila Nicol from Schroders. So Claire, over to you and to the panel.
Thank you, Natalie. My microphone's working. Hello to everyone watching at home. I'm kind of blindly staring into where I think the camera is. You've got some competition. So if you want to ask a question to the panel, my advice would be getting quick, because I was going around at lunchtime, and I've got a nice little stack here from people who are in the live Langcat audience. But I also have Mark's iPad and his password, which I'm hoping is also your PIN number, because I nicked your bank card at lunch when you weren't looking. So I'll just take a second to log in to that, and hopefully you won't be able to tell from my hand movements which numbers I'm pressing. There we are. So just send me questions as they occur. If we have people in the room who would like to ask questions as well and didn't get to give me one of these, then I will look around occasionally and you can wave a hand, and we do have a roving mic. So I think the main thing is that we want to get through as many with our great panel as possible in the next 50 minutes, right? Great. Okay. So I'll kick off. I want to ask a couple of questions of my own, because I can. So I'm your Fiona Bruce. I can flutter my eyelashes and do what I like, raise my eyebrows. I was very struck by the YouGov research that Langcat had done. And the thing that really struck me was the lack of trust. Now, panel, what do you think could be done to drive more trust in the industry? Sarah, shall I come to you first, because you're neatly in the middle.
Yeah, I can do. I don't think we help ourselves sometimes. So if I think about a simple, in inverted commas, thing like a pension transfer, and I think about the regulatory responsibility that lies with all of us in terms of the disclosure we have to give, and whether the customer is really interested, coming back to the desire for knowledge point, whether the customer really needs to know all that, do they need to understand all that, or do they need to just understand the outcome that they're heading towards? Question. And then I think about the processes and the structures, the structural challenges we've got in the industry around how long those things take to complete. It's quite difficult sat here, actually, I can't see any of you. How long those processes take to complete. Sometimes for an in-specie transfer, the customer doesn't know where their money is. They don't know when they're going to get their hands on it. Now, Origo are obviously doing great work in that space. But I think we don't, when those kind of things happen to our customers and they don't know what's happening to their money or when they will be able to get their hands on it, I think we need to look at ourselves and say, what can we do better? That's what I'd say.
A good answer. I'm often struck as well when I speak to older people about pensions. They commonly say things like, "Oh, you don't want to put any of your money in a pension. Get a buy-to-let property instead." Anthony, what would you like to?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I don't think it's any surprise that there's a lack of trust. I mean, every week there's a new fine for a financial institution doing something wrong. The British Steel debacle we talked about, but I think the industry does a pretty poor job of making things complicated for consumers and for customers. I mean, I bought car insurance the other day and we've got one of our cars is bottom of the range, 1 litre engine. It's for the daughters to learn to drive.
Bangonomics.
Not worth much at all. And, a big, thick terms and conditions document that, I just didn't trust, didn't read, and so on. I agree with your point there around stuff goes into black holes. If you think about going to a new financial advisor, one of the early processes is taking that letter of authority. The advisor might as well say, I'll see you in 6 weeks when I've got all the information back from all the various providers, because that's how long it takes. So I think we need more solutions that, make stuff go slicker. In terms of that transfers going into a black hole, we've actually got a solution that tracks the progress of a transfer, and yet only one customer is choosing to display the data. So it's there, but if people just take the steps to do it.
I wonder why. Sheila, what do you think could build trust? And it comes to James and Joe.
I mean, the first thing I would say is I was thinking a bit about this last night, and I reached for the Edelman Trust Study, which is a global study about trust generally. And they concluded that distrust is now society's default emotion. So I think we're in an overall world, and talking about how things have changed in the last 10 years, I think in the last 10 years, trust in anything has declined, especially in institutions like us, and especially where we're saying, trust us. That's actually what we do, because we can't promise you anything for, you're not going to see a result for 15, 20, 25 years. And yet we're endemically in a world of distrust generally. So in terms of what we can do about it, I mean, also you don't trust what you don't understand. And that, there was quite a lot of discussion about that. So I think, and maybe we can get onto this later, I'm not sure that education is necessarily the thing. I think it's an important aspect, and I know you're right about this, Claire. I prefer the word engagement. And I think getting people to engage with us, not expecting people to come to us. It's about the language we use. It's about the way that we communicate. It's about some of the regulatory stuff where references were made to fact sheets. We have to hand over bits of paper called key information documents that people don't read and can't see it on a PDF on their phone. So I think it's about communication, but it's about reaching out to people where they are rather than expecting them to come to us.
Very good. And yes, I think the question from the audience earlier about the language on fund fact sheets, is it overly masculine? I was going to say it's overly boring and never gets to the point. It's just like, tell me what bloody things are in this fund and what it's supposed to do. James?
Well, I take a slightly different view to Sheila. I think to suggest that the public is distrusting and so the industry is getting swept away in a kind of wave of distrust of everything probably gives a bit too much credit to the industry. There's a pretty good reason why people distrust financial services companies. A lack of transparency, over complexity, and sorry, my mic's gone off.
Conspiracy.
There you go, it's back again. Yeah, they're like, turn it off, turn it off.
It's because you disagreed with me.
And I think that people distrust politicians because they lie. They distrust the media because
they hate journalists.
There's good reasons to distrust all these people. I don't think consumers are just distrusting of everything. The financial services industry has to get its house in order. I'm very excited about the consumer duty, and I think, if it works and is followed through as the FCA intends, it will restore trust in the industry because it forces companies to ask those difficult questions. Are we charging a fair amount to our customers? Are we explaining to them in a way that they understand? It took assessments of value for fund managers to finally go, oh yeah, we have been ripping our customers off for a long time. We better cut those charges. It's not like they didn't know that. They were just going, well, this is a great product. We can get away with charging 1% for a tracker that costs us nothing to run. There's still a long way to go here. In terms of the audience, perhaps, financial advice, how many people who are practitioners here put their prices up on their website and explain how much it costs?
Yeah, let's have a show of hands. Great question. If you're a financial firm practitioner, how many of you actually have black and white information about fees on your website? I can see about 3, 4 hands. Yeah, not very many. I do think it puts a lot of people off because you think, well, I have to be rich to be an investor. I have to have money before I can go to an advisor. And a lot of people have more money than they think, maybe, especially in pensions. And it could be a barrier, part of the advice gap. We'll come back to some of these points later. Finally, Joe, little financial planner, what is your take on the trust question? I'm sure your clients trust you.
Yeah, so I think the people who don't trust financial services are probably people who are outside. So in terms of they don't have an advisor or they don't know someone in financial advice, because usually it's not an accessible field. We had the financial crisis where, so many people who had no interest in financial services beforehand, suddenly their whole lives were impacted by this other. And when things, positive things don't enter the news very often, and there is so much misinformation out there, particularly on social media, and I don't think there is enough either regulated individuals or, proper financial planners putting themselves out there to combat that misinformation. And I think that void allows mistrust to breed and live.
Okay, well, I'm sure we'll get some more questions about social media and influencers. I do a lot of stuff on social media and enjoy it, but equally I see a lot of stuff that is absolutely rubbish. I think it would be great if more financial planners were on it, but we've spoken before about this. There's a problem, we think, with people who've got qualifications potentially speaking about that. But you ask the questions. Tell me what you would like to know. My iPad is on. First question from a member of the audience here is all about platforms. What does the platform of the future look like? And I will supplement that with another quite similar one, but also good. Will we see greater consolidation of platforms in the future? Anthony, do you want to tackle that one first?
Well, the first part of the question around what does the platform of the future look like, I guess it's one that's fully integrated, one that starts as it means to go on and thinks about how it can connect with different tools and different parts of the advice process and so on. So one that is completely API driven, that is almost agnostic to the funds it adds or the tools it uses, would be my view. Just remind me of the second question.
Will we see greater consolidation of platforms in the future?
I think it's inevitable. I remember I've launched 2 platforms. I've still got the scars to prove it. That was a hard first year mark, wasn't it? And I remember doing a business case and the break-even point was around 7 billion of assets. And that was a while ago. So scale is really important. So I think we will see consolidation, yeah.
Okay. Anybody else want to come in on platforms? Or shall I move on?
I would
Sarah?
just reiterate that data is going to be key, as Anthony said. Opening up your data, sharing it, integrating with advisor systems is going to be critical for success in this.
Well, while we're
channel.
talking about platforms, may I throw in a question about the dashboard, watching the Pensions Minister and Tom earlier. Tom, I haven't seen you yet properly. Say hello. There you are. I will come and mob you afterwards. I hope you like the shoes which were bought for this conference. But when Tom was quizzing the Pensions Minister about the dashboard, he was quite flippant in his remark, I thought, about saying, oh, well, you couldn't get on with it, the industry. Why do we think that the industry couldn't do it, and what hope do we have that this will happen in the future? Do you want to come in on that, Sarah? And then I'm sure James and Anthony have more to say.
I can do. It's not something I thought very deeply about, but I think there are many competing interests at play, and I think that's the challenge. And I think it needed the regulation to pull the industry in the right direction. That's what I'd say.
You're nodding, Anthony.
Yeah, I know the answer to this. And disclaimer, I'm a super fan of the dashboard, and Origo's now beginning the work to build the core architecture.
So you weren't the sponsor?
But not the sponsor, but I'm a big fan of it. It's, I think, the biggest catalyst we've got to get people engaged with their financial futures. But I think the answer to this is, when the pension dashboard was in doubt, there was rumours that it was going to be canned and it wasn't going to be a government-sponsored initiative. I wrote out to the biggest 25 pension companies in the UK. We got 24 of them into our boardroom, and we asked them, if the government doesn't sponsor this, would you join an Origo-led version of the pensions dashboard in a kind of in a non-compelled way? Would you do it? And they all said yes, but we need the government to legislate because we don't trust other pension companies to do it. So they worried that if it was just them providing the data, they would be at a disadvantage. So they relied on legislation to force everyone, compel everyone to provide the data.
See, I wonder if there'd actually be an advantage to being a first mover, because people could, if they want to see their pension on their iPad, could move it to a provider that is on the dashboard. Sheila, do you have any views on this from your regulatory counsel?
What the question I'm asking myself is actually, it's one thing for the pensions dashboard to be developed, but how far away are we from where I can get all my financial information in one place? And people like, financial planners are not actually spending half their time just trying to consolidate the information that people have. And also, how far away are we from digital ID and all those sorts of things? I've no idea, but you know much more about this than I do.
I see pension dashboard actually just one part of open finance.
Yeah,
We should
exactly.
definitely not stop it.
Yeah.
Pensions, open
Yeah.
banking, pension dashboard, open finance.
Yeah.
I think we're about 10 years away.
Oh, really?
I think it probably will take legislation for the same reason,
Yeah.
so that laggards are forced to join. But I think it will be fantastic for the consumer once we get it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved in conversations in Brussels about it, and actually the thing that the consumer groups get really, really worried about is data protection. This is my data, and how is my data going to be protected? And it's got to be clear that I own this data. That seems to be the biggest stumbling block.
That's
at the
interesting.
moment.
Can I do another show of hands in the audience? Sorry for people watching at home, but you can still put your hand up if you want to feel like you're joining in. Who has used any kind of open banking related service on their smartphone? Okay, that's more hands than I thought. Very interesting. I mean, I've just linked up my bank accounts together on my main bank account, so I can see that different bits of money have been transferred to different pots. James, you look like you would like to come in on this.
I mean, on the pension dashboard, why it hasn't happened, and I think is, partly for some of the reasons there. I mean, I think it's always difficult for the industry to be persuaded by the argument that there is a greater benefit that lies somewhere down the road, of consumers being able to have a greater understanding of pensions and be more active and switch easier. When you're thinking, well, that's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to be really hard to do, and it's all working quite well for our shareholders right now with a whole bunch of inert customers who don't really understand what's going on. So, we'll probably just stick with where we are, and it takes the government to just go, no, we've got to go this way. So it will be a good thing, and I agree. I mean, it has to be one piece of open finance. There's an exciting world somewhere that. I think maybe 5 years ago I would have said it's 10 years away, and now I think it might be 20 years away, where, we can see all our finances on our phone, we can, understand what the best financial decisions are using the power of the data in our accounts. But in spite of a considerable amount of effort, we seem to be moving at a snail's pace.
No, I mean, I'm actually thinking of deleting some banking apps from my phone and putting them just on my iPad, which is left at home, because the latest, if the scammers can't get you over the phone, people are mugging you and using your thumbprint at force to make you transfer stuff direct from your bank account elsewhere, which is particularly worrying. Now, let's move on. Another question. Is Vanguard a genuine disruptor to the advice sector or an opportunity? Whoever asked that question, thank you. Because it's a really good one. Now, who am I going to throw at this first? Joe, would you like to come in? Vanguard, a genuine disruptor, do you think, or an opportunity?
I think probably both.
Good answer.
So it's been mentioned already, with prod coming in, lots of financial planning firms are essentially contracting in terms of the number of clients that they service, the types of clients that they work with. So I actually really welcome Vanguard, particularly in this space, because what they're doing is bridging some of that advice gap. Now, it's very early on to see what impact they will have, and I think there needs to be much more visibility in terms of, them just as a market player. So I'm not sure if they're a disruptor, because I'm not sure what they're doing is really innovative enough to be called a disruptor, but there is a massive opportunity there that they seem well placed to be taking advantage of, and hopefully more and more people. And I think it needs scale to go into that space will follow.
And particularly for younger people, because the last time I wrote about it, certainly they were only doing advice in the accumulation phase. Decumulation, it gets a lot harder. James, Sheila, anyone else on the panel like to come in on this one? Is Vanguard a genuine disruptor to the advice sector?
I will just link it up with some of the conversations we've had earlier, in the sense that once when I was arriving in Washington, D.C., and I was going through the airport, and I handed over my passport, and they said, "What's the reason for your visit?" And I said, "I was here for a conference." What's that? I said, "It's a mutual funds event." And he said, "Now, I've got my money in a Franklin Templeton fund at the moment. Don't you think I should be switching it to Vanguard?" Now, if we ever get to the stage in the UK and Europe where you are having a conversation with a border control officer about where they should be investing, then we've really made it.
Great example. Yeah. Presumably he ignored all of the counterfeit dollar bills in your trader's suitcase.
I, of course, said that I was not qualified to give advice.
Excellent. James, what do you think about Vanguard's entry to the advice market?
I don't know much about the detail behind it, but obviously, I know what Vanguard has stood for in terms of, low costs, and I'd welcome that principle being brought to this market if they can. Bring something that's simple, easily accessible and cheap for consumers, and that's got to be good. We all agree there's a financial advice gap, and a lot of people feel that they can't afford it. So, hopefully they'll play a part in bringing it to more people.
Okay, well, great question. I don't have any on the iPad yet. The password is still working. So if you would like to send in a question from home, be the first. I don't have to read out your name, but the facility is there. Now, you can tell a lot about people from their handwriting. I did have a book about graphology, I believe it's called, once when I was a teenager. The person who has written this question very much looks like they were laughing very loudly when they wrote it, and I suspect that it's maybe not aimed at the panel, but maybe aimed at Mark and co. Will you vote? Well, what will you vote in the referendum? Now you know you won't get a pension. I'll put it to you.
I actually lived in England for 12 years and quite admired, the noises coming out of the Scottish government. Now I live in Edinburgh, and they now govern where I am. How will I vote? Should I keep my powder dry? I'll vote the same regardless of the pensions, which is, I don't think independence would be a good thing for Scotland or for the United Kingdom, is my view, being really candid. I think that there's a number of businesses represented today serve right across the UK. Certainly Origo does. Most of our customers are in England. I don't want to have to work out the transfer value in a different currency for a transfer. So regardless of my pension.
And then there's the issue of what the Scottish currency might be called.
Yes.
The groat, I think, was suggested in an FT letter once. But I'm sure we can think of others. Well, I will move on. I think people can ask you about this in the bar later on. It's perhaps a good idea. We'll switch to a slightly less inflammatory topic, ESG. Question here, a lot of talk of ESG investing is going on. What are the platforms doing to be more ESG? And I might extend that to say, what are advisors doing to be more ESG? Who would like to come in first on ESG? ESG means green shit, by the way, for anyone who...
Not talking about providers. I can come in. But...
That's how I explain it to the graduate trainees. Jo, young people, we're told, are interested in ESG. Is this true?
Yes, very interested, but I don't think it is a generational thing. Certainly for our clients across the board, regardless of age, have been really engaged in this, and we've actually just changed our core investment piece so that it automatically includes ESG exposures in it, rather than it being do you want ESG or not?
It's in there.
It's in there. We've made a business decision about it, and so far all of our clients have really welcomed it. I guess if you're ever going to ask someone, do you want to be slightly more ethical with your investments or not, no one's going to say no, albeit lots of clients do have questions around, how green is something, and we're always very clear to say we're taking small steps in the right direction rather than promising something that's unrealistic. But as a company, and I know lots of other financial planning firms are on this journey as well, are doing things like B Corp. So as a firm, what are we doing to make sure that our sustainability is going in the right direction as well?
Good answer. Sarah, would you like to come in on this one?
I certainly can. I think what's interesting is obviously sitting in a kind of platform DFM business, we see lots of due diligence requests from financial advisors, and it's increasing. The questions we're getting from advisors in this area is on the up. It's of increasing importance to advisor firms, and that will be a reflection of the increase in importance to their clients. ESG, many of you will already know, to Parmenion is not new. You know, we've had solutions out there for 10 years now, but what we have done more recently is become signatories to the UN PRI. We are implementing ESG credentials across all solutions, across the way we run our business. And actually, I just think that's good business practice now. I think it's not optional. I think everybody has to think about it, and everybody has to have a strategy. And I would be surprised if anybody in this room isn't thinking about it, to be honest.
Although I do think there's a danger in people going all in into ESG, and some of the conversations around defaulting company pension savers into a wholly ESG fund, I personally don't think are appropriate. We've got a comment from somebody at home. Hurrah! Sean, he says, Silver Surfers too are interested in ESG. Platforms are playing their part, but the key is asking the right questions and not to lead the client. Don't know if any of the panel want to come in on that. Sheila?
I'd maybe come in on it because we did some research with advisors where there were a number of them thought they were already under an obligation to ask their clients about their sustainability, their ESG preferences. That's actually not the case. It is a MiFID requirement, but of course we're no longer covered by MiFID. It's a MiFID requirement which will come in the summer. And I think we're going to start, this is another case where we're going to be learning from things going on in Europe, and then we'll be sort of learn from their experiences, perhaps is a better way of saying them, their mistakes, but there have been mistakes there. So I think, in many ways, my response nowadays is surely, given that ESG and sustainability is becoming so much more mainstream, and Morningstar just produced figures yesterday, again in Europe, but how Article 8 and Article 9 funds are actually now outselling other types of funds, that interest is already there. Yes, there's much more political push. It's not the civil servants, it's more the politicians who are saying, we want you to go here, and particularly around climate change. But there's less of that going on in the UK than in the rest of Europe. The UK is a bit more balanced around it. But, as I say, I think it's something that the FCA has said it's going to look in due course at advisors' responsibilities in this space, but they haven't got there yet. But actually, let's preempt them. Let's do it right and show them how to do it right, and then be able to go to them and say, look, rather than you telling us how to do it, we can help tell you how to do it. It would seem to me to be the way forward.
Great. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, well, my view on this is really, really important. We're talking about the future of the world here, and it's it's undeniable. And I think we're beginning to see some good stuff happening in this space. So I loved it the other day there when some funds kicked out some businesses from their portfolio because they weren't green. That's real action in place. The amount of money that our industry has, can make big impact on this. But my challenge though would be to, particularly to product providers and platforms, in terms of greenwashing. Do this, but you just think about the amount of paper that you're still sending out. It's one thing to talk about your ethical funds, but just think about there's a global paper shortage because people are still sending unnecessary paper when they can be sending encrypted emails with sensitive information that's safe as houses or statements digitally as well. So don't be rhetorical with it. Do it holistically.
Yeah, no, I think that is definitely a good point. Now, Gary, watching at home, has, I assume you're at home, you could be in an office, could be on a bus, I don't know, has sent in a question related to our discussion. He believes there are going to be two of big themes throughout 2022 and beyond. One of them ESG and sustainable investing, but the other being better tech and integrations. On both of these points, he says loads still needs to be done for the benefit of the profession and consumers. But what suggestions and ideas do our panel have to move these areas along much quicker? So we've talked quite a bit about ESG. We haven't talked so much about tech and integrating the back end of your business. Who would like to come in first on this? I'm going to pick on someone. Okay, you come in first quickly, then. But I do want to hear from Joe and from Sarah.
Who was that question from?
Gary with 2 R's.
It sounds like it's from somebody from Origo, actually, because it's a perfect question for me. So we've got a thing, we've got the Origo Integration Hub, which attempts to connect systems to systems. So we're using it to connect practice management software businesses to platforms and providers. And it does things like valuations and transaction history, and it can open up accounts through a straight-through process. So that our vision is a connected financial services. Now, it's been slow yards. We're trying to unpick point-to-point integrations. But actually, we had a bit of a breakthrough year last year in 2021. We've now got over 100 different connections. But our vision is just to make data appear on a screen without having to rekey, without making it wrong, in as many straight-through processes as possible. But it's a long way to go.
Okay. James, when it comes to consumer trust in handing over data, do you think that has a role to play here? Or is it the case that consumers like us, we don't want the envelope, the paper envelope coming through our door? We would much rather have things that are online, maybe app-based, to speed things up.
There's not a one-size-fits-all, is there? There's a diverse bunch of preferences amongst consumers, and you have to make sure that I think that you're reasonably serving the needs of those people that rely on a more paper-based version of their affairs until there is a reasonable alternative for them. So although it's a diminishing number, there is still people who are digitally excluded and can't get access to or can't interact because of a disability with digital services. But yeah, I think that they're in terms of the data question, you can build trust in that. There are lots of areas where people do put trust for their data to be used. I mean, we've gone to a world where now we've all probably got NHS apps in our phones where we've got our COVID status there. Arguably some of the most sensitive data about us, and yet we've sort of all accepted overnight that we just carry that around in our pocket and it sits somewhere digitally. So consumers are getting more and more comfortable with with data about them being out there. But the government and the industry need to stay ahead of making sure that there are the right checks and balances in place to ensure it's protected. And every scandal that comes out about data leakages, particularly in any kind of very sensitive area, will very quickly undermine any progress that's made there.
Okay, I'm going to move on. I've got 2 very good, slightly different questions about trade bodies. Don't all fall asleep, they are good. Trade bodies have been mentioned through the morning's session, highlighting industry issues. But what did the panel think the role of professional bodies such as the CII, PFS and CISI will or should be in driving the industry forward and rebuilding trust? So have a think about that one, and I'll read out the second one, which is from Patrick Ingram, wherever you are, Patrick. Thank you for a great question. Why, he says, do the LANCAT keep talking about the profession when there are no professional bodies which define how you do the job or check you are doing it right or kick you out if you don't? Now, this is beyond my knowledge. I don't know if the CISI can defrock you. I know that the FCA can take sanctions against individuals. But panel, if you want to reference either of those questions in your answer, I think the overriding question here is what should these trade bodies be doing for our membership fees? Sheila, shall I come to you first?
They're not trade bodies I'm so familiar. I'm more familiar with the PIMFA and the IA and like.
We can pass to James to save time.
Well, it's an issue I'm close to. Is I don't know if it's not working again. I'll talk on this, whatever. I'm a member of the Professional Standards Committee on the Chartered Insurance Institute, And it's important, firstly, to make the distinction between a trade body, which is there to represent the interests of the industry and in government mostly, and
as the Pensions Minister was saying,
as
come to them with
opposed-
solutions.
as opposed to a professional standards body that is there to raise standards. And they have to do that by sharing examples of good practice, helping interpret new pieces of legislation, regulation, and they do that. And there's always a clamour for our members to kick people out, to be more ruthless, to punish people for failures. But it's actually quite hard to do because, often, you can make them write in their contract that if they're being investigated by the FCA, they need to let you know. But, it turns out that the bad guys aren't always that honest. So
Funny that, yeah.
There are times when you can kick people out, blatant disregard for the rules and the codes of ethics and so on. But, generally the role of professional standards bodies is to lead the way and sort of, what's the rising tides metaphor, which I can't remember now, but you know the one. And, that will leave the guys down the bottom there looking out of kilter. And that is the role of a professional standards body. And I think we shouldn't give them too much of a hard time for not being out there using the stick, because it's not very effective. And one thing I say is, the consumer duty is all about being proactive and trying to sort of say, let's not wait until we've seen the misdemeanors and then fine people and do it. It's too late then, isn't it? You have to prove all the time that you're delivering the right outcomes. And actually, professional standards bodies were already in that boat, trying to pull people forward. I think that they're an important part of the landscape. And if you're not a member of one, why not?
Very good. They do some very useful surveys, which we use in FT Money. I'll move on again. Question here about small IFA practices from somebody in the audience called Andy Arthur. Thank you for your question, Andy. He says, does the regulator believe in small local IFA practices that are directly regulated, and can they survive or have a place as regulation increases? Well, I'll come to you first, Sheila. I'll give you a minute to think about it. One of the things that I read in preparation for this Q&A was the SOTAN report that Lalangkat produced, the State of the Advisor Nation. I don't know if anyone's read a copy. If you haven't, I'm sure Mark can sell you one in the bar afterwards for a few £100. But one of the things that really struck me, am I earning my fee? Excellent. One of the things that really struck me about that report was all of the data in it about professional indemnity insurance and the huge costs that just keep on increasing. I mean, this is a story that we've written in FT and FT Advisor, I don't know how many times, and it really seems to be threatening a lot of these smaller firms with extinction. And the other thing that I noticed in the report was with the consolidation question with advisory firms, and the top answer to your question about how often has it been since you were last approached by a firm that wanted to take you over being last week for most of the people who were consulted on that. So Sheila, now you've had a little bit of time to think about it, what do you think the future is for small IFA practices that are directly regulated? Can they survive?
I mean, I think of course I'm no longer there and it's a long time since I was at the regulator, but do talk to them. They would say they want the whole range. I mean, that would be their stock answer, that there is a place for everyone. On the other hand, if you think about the amount of stuff they're throwing at us all, how on earth you can cope with all the stuff that's coming at us in a smaller business, I don't know. I mean, we struggle as a large business to keep up with what's going on. So sort of to maintain that sort of compliance and awareness of what's going on in the regulatory world, I think must be very, very challenging if you're running a small business. And I mean, interestingly, of course, there's one of the things we haven't touched on, which you probably can't not say something in an audience about this, is the acronym FSCS. And there's the debate about the funding of the FSCS. And the FCA are also talking about this consumer investment strategy. In the context of the FSCS, they're saying, for example, one of the possibilities would be to increase the capital requirements for IFAs. And I have to say, I hadn't realised that the minimum capital requirement from IFA is £20,000.
Wow.
That's not a very much amount of money given the responsibilities that you have got. So when I read that paragraph, and I wrote it down, and my immediate response was, question mark, is this the end of the small IFA? But actually, you know, I'm not sure I would want to work with an advisor who only had £20,000 behind them.
No,
So,
it's a fair question.
I think I think that debate is going to take place over the next couple of years.
I mean, Joe, as our advisor on the panel, I mean, what's your view about this and just consolidation in the industry in general when it comes back to the issue of consumer choice and having every shade of advisor?
So, I think particularly with the increase in sort of private equity money, certainly in the financial planning space, it definitely restricts the growth of smaller financial planning firms who might want to start growing inorganically, but absolutely cannot compete with the level of money that is available to the existing consolidators. And I don't think it's always realistic to expect someone who, you know, has founded and grown their own financial planning firm for decades to suddenly feel like they need to do the right thing, I guess, for their clients and choose a smaller firm to take on their client bank. Just to the point earlier, I also think it's unrealistic for the FCA to add all of this additional regulation or regulatory requirement on financial planning firms and for them not to be increasing their fees. And that is directly opposed to what they want to happen, but it's just not the reality of the situation. I mean, I certainly don't know of any financial planning firm who is actively lowering their fees, and the majority of firms that I speak to are actually having to increase it.
Interesting. Just conscious of time, we've got about 10 minutes left. Is there anyone in the audience here who hasn't asked a question at the lunch who would like to ask one now or in a few minutes? Oh, yes, great, okay. We have a hand up there. I'll ask the panel another question first so that you can get to her first. Any requests, writes this person, for the new Brexit Opportunities Minister that would help your business/clients? Or if I could put it maybe another way, if you had a magic wand, panel, what is the one thing that you might like him to do? Shall I start with you, Sarah?
What a question.
Maybe disappear.
Yes, I'm trying to bite my tongue a little bit on this one. So undo it all, maybe. But we are where we are. I haven't got an answer, sorry.
Okay, James.
Yeah, actually, I have an answer to this one. I think there is a silver lining to Brexit in financial services. I mean, it's the only silver lining I've come across, actually, across the whole thing. But I really hated the disclosure regime in financial services that was being pushed through from Europe. I thought it was really unhelpful. You know, you're sort of forced to layer summary documents and insurance product information documents and pre-credit disclosure documents. We could just tear all that up now and actually think about, you know, how do we communicate with customers in a way that, you know, is understandable, realising that they only have a minimal appetite to read things and a minimal capability to understand things. So
before they get ended up put in the drawer.
Yeah, so you know, you have to do it while they're engaged, and that's when they're applying for things. It's when, you know, the annual statement drops through the door. You know, it's communicating at moments that are relevant to them. But you know, bundles of paper or even bundles of digital files sent to them at the time they transact that we all know they don't read. Your own data shows they don't open. You know, are completely pointless. So you know, my wish list is tear up the Consumer Credit Act and sort that disclosure part of the regime out, and then do the rest for the whole of the financial services disclosure regime.
Great. Well, that was such a good answer. Anyone else want to come in, or should we go to our question up in the gods. The lady in the scarf, in my best Fiona voice. The lady in the scarf.
I guess I don't know whether it's a question or not really, but around the trust thing, around the FSCS thing, around the minimum capital requirements thing, around the trade bodies taking people out of the industry thing, for me it all comes back to the trade bodies hand out certificates of professional standing, so it is within their power to refuse to provide those, and the certificates of professional standing are
I'm glad someone's cleared that up.
supposed to be certificates of professional standing. And the other point around the FSCS, etc., is this minimum terms of insurance. And one of the major problems that I see within financial services industry is the fact that the minimum term of insurance is woefully inadequate. So, for example, in relation to British Steel, which we spoke about earlier, most of the firms who are involved in British Steel will not have insurance for the DB transfers that they did. Hence the huge amounts which are falling onto the
burden,
FSCS. So in terms of trust, I think we need to sort that out first.
Do you have a question for the panel before we waste too much more time? Because I've got two here. But very interesting what you had to say. Right, in which case I will ask the question that's come in.
Claire,
on the
I've got a
iPad. You would like
comment
to
on
come
that,
back?
if
You
I
can
may.
comment. That's good.
I mean, and it comes back to the trust thing as well, and it's actually also about the regulator, and it's about the attitude of the regulator, and also links in with what you said, Joe. It is not helped by the messaging that we're getting from the regulator. So on the one hand, the regulator is saying we've got too many people with too much money in bank accounts. We've got to get them more into long-term investments. And yet, when you read, they keep going on about how expensive we are. Thank you, FCA. We're expensive because of the requirements that you impose on us. And then if you read their consumer investment strategy, the first thing you read and the first infographic is that their job is to support that. What needs to happen is they need to support the development of an environment where consumers can invest confidently. Fine. It must be clear to consumers what happens if things go wrong. So that's the first thing you have to tell, and the cost of redress must be paid. So the first thing you're doing is when you're sitting down with a potential investor is to say, look, this is terribly expensive and it might go wrong, but don't worry about it, we're looking after you.
Yes, trust us. Trust us. Very good. Now, we've got a question about age here. Sorry to cut you off, lady with the scarf, but I really wanted to get to this. We are an ageing profession. How do we continue to attract the next generation of talent, not just advisors, but also administrators, analysts, etc., to join the industry when there is apparent lack of industry trust from consumers? Joe, as the youngest member of our panel, I will come to you first. How do we attract more younger people to our profession?
So certainly the work of people like Next Gen Planners have done a huge amount to attract younger people into the industry. Lots of work being done in schools, lots of work done in universities, because so many people don't know that we exist. And even if they did, they just assume that it's not accessible to them. So I think lots more work in that area needs to be done. And again, this goes back to more of us putting ourselves out there, either in social media or, whatever it is, so that we, aren't seen as other, aren't seen as inaccessible.
And you are on Twitter. I'm following you. Do you want to tell people what your Twitter handle is so they can also do that?
Well, I am on Twitter, but I'm not very active on Twitter. But it's JAREN Little. That's my. Is that a Twitter handle?
Yeah.
See, I'm an Instagram and a TikTok person, so I don't know if that also belies my age.
What do you find as a financial planner you get out of being on Instagram and TikTok?
So I'm not on there for financial planning purposes. I'm actually on Twitter for financial planning purposes. But what
you're an observer.
I'm an observer, but I guess, again, because of the algorithms, I do come across a huge amount of financial content on Instagram and on TikTok. And the majority of it is completely unfounded. It's, but these are non-regulated individuals. There is no accountability. They can say whatever they want with absolutely no recourse. So I think that's a big problem that we're facing.
Very good. Anybody else want to come in on this topic of ageing advisors? How we can get young people interested? I don't know if you have a view, James. I mean, personally, I'd love to see more actual advisors making content on Instagram and TikTok. I'm on TikTok now. I still don't know how it works. Somebody at lunchtime was giving me some tips.
I mean, I think diversity and inclusion is an important part of that that hasn't been mentioned, and people need to see themselves reflected in the industry.
Absolutely right.
And I think parts of the industry are not very diverse or inclusive yet. So we've started the conversation, but it needs to become more than that.
I mean, I have to say, Flick, which is the FT's new financial literacy and inclusion campaign, it's a charity that I've helped set up. We are working with lots of young finfluencers, it is a word, on these platforms. We go through reams and reams of stuff, and there are some really good ones who do give good non-kind of investment advice, buy crypto, etc. type messages. Just useful information. The one that you told me earlier about if you bought a Starbucks, if instead of buying a Starbucks every day, if you put £2.40 a day into your pension from the age of 20. Then what was the answer?
It's about £250,000 at retirement.
Yeah. I mean,
or could be.
I mean, coffee.
Advice.
Everyone's always.
This is not advice.
Very good. Okay, well, I've got one final question before we get off the stage, correct? Natalie is nodding at me. So I spoke to Ian Beeston from Money Alive. Where are you, Ian? In the room. Hello. At lunchtime earlier. Now, you may or may not know that Ian plays in a band. He is a drummer. And he is trying to use the medium of song to engage more people on social media with the tricky subject of pensions, among other things. Now, Ian has come up with a cover version of the Paul Simon classic 50 Ways to Lose Your Pension. See what he did there? Which includes the lyrics, "That's a scam, Pam," and various other information points about not clicking on links in emails, and it all rhymes. It's very, very clever. Can I challenge the panel to come up with any ways that they would similarly bastardise a pop song to make it relevant to financial advisors, financial consumers, financial advice in general? While you think about that, I'm sure, Mark, you can carry this on in the bar afterwards, perhaps with a guitar. One of the hits that Ian is working on next is a cover version of YMCA that he's going to call MNPA, after the minimum national pensions age, which may be a bit of a tougher sell. And we have got a Rolling Stones cover coming up on the Money Clinic podcast that I present called "Can't Get No Company Pension," which you will hear in a few weeks' time when it goes out. So, do we have any song ideas from our panel to finish up today?
I don't
Drawing
know.
a blank.
You might as well ask, can you just tell a joke?
There must be something in When I'm 64, but I can't work out
Yes,
what it
no,
is.
When I'm 64, I think that's a really good one.
Will
Ian,
you
actually.
still
Yeah.
something me when I'm, will you
Will I still be drawing down, or will it have all gone? Could be one.
Or you could do "The Only Way Is Up," but of course it may go down.
Oh, yes, very good.
Good one.
Very good. Yaz and the plastic population. Saw that on Top of the Pops too the other weekend. Joe, do you have any song ideas that nobody else in the audience would have heard of from the more modern earth?
I mean, the only song that I got stuck in my head now is "Spice Up Your Life," so I'm not sure.
Well,
that has
okay. Well, that's a lovely point on which to end. Well, please join me, everybody. Everyone at home who asked a question, thank you. Everybody who gave me their question in the lunch hall, thank you. And thank you to our wonderful panel.